You know, when you think of Stirling Castle, you probably picture this majestic Scottish landmark, right? A fortress just brimming with history. But what if I told you that right under the feet of thousands of tourists, there's a dark secret? A medieval cold case that tells a story of just unimaginable violence. All right, let's get into it.
For centuries, this whole mystery was literally sealed in stone, completely lost to time. But a chance discovery would unearth a brutal crime scene, and it would challenge everything we thought we knew about medieval warfare. So what exactly did they find under those castle floors?
So our story kicks off in 1997, and it doesn't start with a murder investigation, but with a pretty simple archaeological question about a building that had been lost for centuries.
A team was given what seemed like a fairly straightforward job: find the foundations of a royal chapel from way back in the 12th century. So they started lifting up the flagstones, probably expecting to find some old walls, maybe a few artifacts.
But what they actually uncovered was something way, way more shocking. Because sealed under the floor, they found a crypt. And inside, a pretty gruesome collection of human skeletons. Suddenly, this wasn't about finding an old chapel anymore. It was about investigating a mass grave. So this sealed crypt held the skeletons of at least 9 people. And the breakdown is kind of startling. 7 men, 1 woman, and just tragically 2 infants. Yeah, this was not a forgotten graveyard. This was something else entirely.
But it's where they were buried that's a huge piece of the puzzle. A royal chapel wasn't your average churchyard. Getting buried there was a privilege, one reserved for the absolute elite. We're talking knights, nobles, really high-status people. This tells us these weren't just random casualties of war. They were important.
But, all that status couldn't save them. When forensic scientists started to examine the skeletons, the bones themselves began to talk. And boy, did they tell a story of sheer, brutal violence.
Get this, 44. Just let that number sink in for a second. 44 separate fractures on one man's skull, all from some kind of blunt object. I mean, this wasn't a single clean blow in the heat of battle. This was a savage, sustained beating. And it didn't even stop at his head. That same man had another 60 fractures across the rest of his body. This was just a merciless assault. It felt personal, it was prolonged, and it was incredibly violent. And the horror just keeps building when we look at another victim, known only as Skeleton 190. He was a young man, barely more than a teenager. The pattern of his injuries, we're talking stab wounds to the chest, a shattered jaw and collarbone. It shows he was attacked from all sides at once, completely overwhelmed by a group of assailants.
And then there's the female skeleton, which just raises so many questions. Her skull had these square holes literally punched through the bone. And these wounds, they are a terrifyingly perfect match for a medieval warhammer. This has led some to believe she wasn't some civilian casualty, but an actual warrior who died fighting.
The absolute chaos of the fight is just written all over these bones. One knight's skull has this massive dent in the front from an axe or a sword, and miraculously, he actually survived that blow. But his luck ran out. The evidence shows he was then killed by an arrow, maybe as he was staggering to his feet, just being finished off by another attacker.
So we've got the victims, we've got the evidence of a massacre, but the big question is why? To understand the motive here, we need to kind of zoom out and look at the world these people lived and died in.
This all went down during one of the most violent periods in all of Scottish history, the Wars of Scottish Independence. So you're thinking William Wallace, Robert the Bruce, the Battle of Bannockburn. It was just an era of constant, brutal warfare.
And Stirling Castle was ground zero for this whole conflict. Seriously, it was considered the key to Scotland, and as you can see, it was just this brutal revolving door of ownership, captured, retaken, captured again. For decades, it was a place of nonstop violence, sieges, and death.
Okay, so now we can really start to put the pieces together. The forensic evidence and the history are about to snap into focus, and they're going to reveal a terrifyingly clear picture of what happened here.
And this is the real key to the whole thing. The injuries, they just don't match what you'd see on an open battlefield. These weren't clean slices from a sword or a puncture from a lance. No, these were crushing, blunt force trauma wounds. And that is the absolute signature of close quarters combat, like inside a castle during a siege. Think about it. Fighting in cramped hallways and tight stairwells with maces and clubs. There's just no room to swing a big sword.
And this also explains that really strange burial.
I mean, why would you put these high-status people in a makeshift grave under a chapel? Well, because during a siege, with enemy forces surrounding the walls, it was just too dangerous to go outside for a proper burial. It was a total act of desperation.
So we've pretty much figured out how and why they died. But even with all this analysis, some questions are always going to linger, these haunting reminders of the human lives that were lost that day.
The thing is, the bones can't give us names. We will probably never know the true identity of that woman who fought and died like a warrior. And the fate of those 2 infants? It's just a heartbreaking mystery. Were they victims of the violence, or did they just succumb to disease or starvation during the siege? Their silence is profound.
Ultimately, what these skeletons give us is this raw, unfiltered look into the reality of medieval war. This is not the romantic stuff you see in movies and legends. This was savage, desperate, brutal fighting that just shattered bodies and lives.
This discovery really forces us to look past the stone walls and the grand battles and to see the true cost of history. It reminds us that for the people who actually lived it, the fight for a nation's freedom wasn't just written in history books, it was written in bone.